We see the narrative progresses on verses 24 to 29. Now progresses to a narrow single disciple, Thomas, not only by name, but also by absence. Somewhere in the 7 days between appearances, he has been carrying a grief he has not been told is reversible. The disciples came to him to lit from the inside. We have seen the Lord. And something Thomas couldn't take one more disappointment unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger into the mark of the nails and put my hand into his side. I will not believe. Popularly, he is called Doubting Thomas. But isn't that unfair for him? He had been with the disciples that first, if he had been with the disciples that first Easter evening when the risen Christ appeared among them, faith would have gripped his heart without hesitation. The gospel simply leaves his absence unexplained. But at this moment, it is the refusal of a wounded heart to be made vulnerable again. And I think you've been in that place before. The thing that you hoped once died before your eyes. And you cannot bear the risk of believing again. And you create walls to protect yourself to not suffer again ever. That is grief calcified into self-protection. And Jesus is not done with it. 8 days later, the next Lord's Day, the doors are still locked. 9 men had seen the Lord and with their own eyes, and they are still hiding. Sanctification is not a single evening's work. And Jesus, who knows this better than anyone, does not respond with impatience. He comes again, same entrance, same peace. But immediately, the text tells us that he turns to Thomas. Jesus shows he heard his disciples even when he wasn't right there with them. He wipes away every doubt, no matter how stubborn the heart might be. It shows an omniscient awareness that transcends physical presence. Jesus tenderly speaks to Thomas. Reach your finger here and see my hands. Put your hand into my side. He has heard every word of Thomas' demand. And he meets it. Not with frustration, not with a theological explanation. He meets it with his wounds. I am not embarrassed by my scars and not threatened by your condition. That is what Jesus is communicating to Thomas. I came back for you specifically. And I think in this moment, we are all Thomas in that scenario. The internal negotiation is real. I will trust God if He comes through this time. I will believe if this resolves the way I needed it to be. Thomas wasn't rejecting Christ. He was rejecting the Christ who went to a cross and came out the other side changed. He wants the version of Jesus he had before everything fell apart. And Jesus, in his grace and love and mercy, is simultaneously tender and devastating, refuses that version of himself. The text doesn't tell us whether Thomas actually touched the wounds. That silence from John's gospel is intentional, because the point is not what his fingers felt. The point is what his heart confessed. my Lord, my God. The highest Christological confession in the entire gospel. The most unyielding skeptic in the room became the author of its greatest doxology, not because he worked himself into belief, but because he was undone by grace. Read the whole gospel against this moment. It opened with the prologue on John 1, verse 1. The Word was God. It was spent already 20 chapters building to a moment when a human being standing in the flesh before the risen Christ says back to him what the narrator already declared in the beginning. Thomas did not come up with a theology. He was overwhelmed into a confession. The most unyielding skeptic in the room, it is the author of the greatest doxology. This is what an encounter with the risen Christ does. It does not merely inform the mind, it reorganizes the soul. And it does so not by giving us everything we demanded, but by giving us himself, which turns out to be more than everything.